Welcome back. So this is the part where I'm supposed to thank the first speaker and then introduce the second speaker. Since I was the first speaker, I'm high-fiving myself. That was super, super fun. And now I'm really excited to introduce to you Cody Sims and Maggie Williams. And so what I want to just share and remind you, hey guys, share and remind you is this is part of a bigger process and part of a book that Cody, Trevor, who's coming later, and Troy Hennekoff are writing together. And we've asked Maggie to join today because she's been through this process a couple of times. And so if you remember, what you just did with the revenue formula was to figure out how do you think you're going to make money and what are all the things you need to map in order to figure out whether you're right or wrong. And now I'm really excited to introduce Cody and Maggie because they're going to help you figure out how to actually do something with that information so you know what to do now and next. So I'm going to sign off and hand it off, and I'll see you later.
Super. Thanks, Amos. Hey, Maggie, how are you?
Hey, Cody. Doing great.
Good to see you here virtually from halfway across, or all the way across the country, I guess. I'm calling in today from Los Angeles, and you're in North Carolina, I assume, yeah?
Pretty almost all the way. Yeah, I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Awesome. Well, yeah. So this workshop that we're going to do, we call it Assumptions, Hypotheses, and Roadmaps. And Maggie's here because, as Amos mentioned, she's gone through this workshop a few times early on in the beginning of her company, and then also fairly recently as well. So has seen it both as a very early stage startup and has seen it as a startup that's kind of in the thick of growing the business. And so what we're going to do here, instead of actually having you go do the workshop, we're going to talk about how to do the workshop. I'm going to share some of the materials because this is really something you can do on your own time. And as we go through it, talk with Maggie about sort of what, Maggie, what you've run into, how you've used this before, where it's been helpful. And really, the purpose of this set of exercises is it's a framework. And it's a framework you can use for your business right now, but it's also a framework, frankly, you can use in your life, which is also nice. It's something you can apply across the board. And what we're going to do is really help you understand the key assumptions that you have in your business or in whatever initiative you're trying to tackle, and help you break those down to understand which of those assumptions you actually know a lot about, which ones you don't know very much about, and which ones are really a priority for you or critical, and which ones aren't, and what you should do based on all of that information. I don't know, Maggie, if you want to sort of share any thoughts about where this has been useful to you as you've been planning for growth or product initiatives or whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first time that I did this workshop with Cody, we were a tech-enabled dog walking company. The last time that I did this workshop, I did it with my team at our leadership retreat, and we had just launched a dog bar, park, and pet care facility. So same company, same team, many pivots. And I kid you not, it was this workshop that has fundamentally been one of the key reasons that we have gotten from where we were to where we are. And it has, like Cody mentioned, it has given us the framework. What I hope Cody talks about here and what has been really important for us was the order of operations by which you go through this workshop so that you don't bias yourself in starting to signal and think like, well, I think this is a critical assumption, so I'm going to, in my mind, make sure it's validated. There's a key order to doing this workshop right that gives you the kind of objectivity that allows you to kind of remove yourself from any bias you had. And what was the most insightful for us as a team, and anybody that's on a team right now, I imagine can relate to this. We had a lot of strong beliefs about what the company is and was that were all very different. And a lot of that came from the assumptions that we had about what made the business work. And it was doing this workshop where we found out that those assumptions that we believed were critical to the business, knew were critical to the business, we didn't have data around them. Like we didn't have data around them that wasn't anecdotal. And when we really started to dig into that and understand that we were driving a lot of decisions based on a very limited experience set and anecdotal data, we had allowed ourselves to kind of start telling different stories and get to different places. And it's this workshop that helped pull it all together and give us the confidence to make a very large series of pivots that has almost tripled the revenue of the company, put us in a much better position for success because of the product market fit that we found. And it all came from really understanding what the critical assumptions were and making sure we had the data to validate them.
Oh, that's awesome. I didn't even know all that. So that's fantastic. Yeah, and a big part of what I like to advocate for, I wrote a Medium post on this a while ago at medium.com/@Cody, is the notion of moving from a like what I would traditionally call a product roadmap, which is, a list of features and dates. And, I've been guilty many times as a product manager in my past life of honestly like wordsmithing the slide to where the slide looks more balanced on a PowerPoint slide or a Google slide than it does in terms of what things should actually be shipping when. And the reality for that is because anything in my experience, anything beyond about, I don't know, a month or two out from where you are right now, you really have no idea what you should be doing as a startup. And so trying to paint a feature-rich roadmap for 12 months from now is, I think, an impossible task, but it is one that as a startup founder, you have to do because you have to share a roadmap with your own employees and your own team. You have to share a roadmap with, your investors. You have to share a roadmap with your board. It's your way of kind of communicating vision. But I find that most founders communicate that vision by putting, a bunch of features against a bunch of dates. A big thing I advocate for is something called the learning roadmap, which is the notion that you actually want to, in anything that's beyond kind of the end of your nose, like that's not in your current sprint planning, it's more about publishing by when do you want to know if something matters or not, as opposed to by this date, we're going to ship this feature. And so I think I'm going to dive in now to actually talking through some of the elements of this workshop. And hopefully that starts to become evident as we go. As Maggie mentioned, because you're here and we're going to go through this whole thing end to end, you're going to get a little bit of a spoiler alert as we go, because it'll show you what the outcome of the workshop is, and you're going to miss a little bit of the process of going through that discovery. So when you go do this, and I hope you do, just know that you want to write down everything you can, regardless of where you think it's going to end up as we take it through this sort of process framework, if you will. So with that, what we normally do is I ask teams, and again, we're in a whole obviously virtual world. So I would recommend the first thing for doing this with your team. And this is a workshop you're going to want to do with really your whole leadership team if you can. You want to use a virtual whiteboarding tool. So there are kind of two that have become sort of dominant in the last few months as we've all gone virtual. There's one called Miro, and there's one called Mural. And I think it's Miro.com and Mural.co, MIRO.com and MURAL.co. Either of them are fine. They are basically virtual whiteboards. And so you can use them to create little sticky notes, drag them around, this, that, and the other. So as a team, you'll want to get onto one instance of, we'll use Miro.com for today because that's what I use. Historically, we would have done this in a room together, like with actual whiteboards, with a whiteboard and sticky notes. But in the absence of that, one of these virtual systems is great. And what I ask everyone to do is spend about 10 minutes as a team writing down on sticky notes one belief statement per sticky about things that you believe drive your business. So I'll flip up here and just share the normal slide that I show for this, and then I'll show kind of what this looks like on a Miro board. So again, just very screen 2, this one, yeah, very simple. What drives your business? So thinking about things like your product plans, your tech plans, your hiring plans, your go-to-market strategies, and each one of you in your company should be doing this directly. So this is not a thing where you're collaborating as you go. Every individual person should be doing this in parallel, and that will allow you to get to something like 15 or 20 stickies each over the course of 10 minutes, which ultimately means you end up with like 50 or, if you have three co-founders, for example, you end up with somewhere like 50 to 60 of these belief statement artifacts. And these become the sort of the raw clay that you'll use throughout the rest of the workshop to help you get some answers on your business. And so this statement sounds like super broad. What are beliefs that drive my business? So I'll show you a few examples of what this looks like. So these are ones that I already prepared. So this is my Miro board. And you can see all you do is you go over here, you grab a sticky note, you pull it in, and write whatever you want. So we believe that, let's see, every customer we support will result in 2x in referrals. Like, I have no idea. I'm just making this up for a made-up business, right? But other ones that we have here, we believe that monthly renewals will be mostly triggered via automatic replenishment. Or we believe that adding a dedicated mobile app will increase usage by 2x. Or we believe that we will use a community support method for customer service. We believe that the primary customer acquisition channel for our business is organic Google search. Again, like, you just want to rapid fire as many of these as you can. And you want them not like, you're not going for accuracy, you're going for volume. So if each founder on the team can take about 10 minutes and write as many of these as you can, and if you all do it, again, you're going to end up with like 50 or 60 of these. And I don't know, Maggie, if you want to sort of talk about like the first time you went through and did this, like kind of where it was tricky, or what kind of pattern you got into as you were writing down these belief statements.
Yeah, I mean, I think so to your point, it can be very broad. So anything specific to, organic word of mouth is going to be the leading driver to our business. Our business relates to dogs. So it was like, dogs are going to still be considered members of the family, which is a little bit more of a subjective, and made us then say, well, what kind of, and as we get through this, understanding what data we need to support the things that we're defining. But having it be broad is a good place to go, I thought, because it really allows you to get the spectrum of what we believe in, to Cody's point. And what you do is, when you take that time, you realize 10 minutes isn't enough, because there's a lot of things you believe in. Yeah. Right. And depending on where you go, I mean, you can easily spend hours kind of drifting into like the components of the business, and, even more philosophical about what you believe the business is and where you think it's going. And so I guess, Cody, that would be a question. If you feel yourself getting overwhelmed, would you continue to keep it broad, or do you think keeping it specific? How would you respond to somebody who's asking for, like, there's a lot of ways I can go with this?
Yeah.
Where do
it's great. I mean, that's where I think making sure you're doing it with your other co-founders, so that you don't feel the burden of having to think of everything you've ever talked about yourself is important. So if each of you do this, you end up with 50 or 60 of these statements. You can absolutely do it for another 10 minutes or so. At some point, you start to get diminishing returns, because as we'll unveil as we move through the exercise here, when it gets down to prioritization, like, your goal really is to pick like the handful of top things. And honestly, I've rarely seen it where startups go through this whole exercise and one of their first 10 or 12 stickies wasn't like one of the things that's most critical to the business, because they're thinking about it all the time. And so, yeah, if you want to make sure you capture every little nuance of detail in your business, you can keep going on it forever. But I do think if you do it for, at most 15 or 20 minutes per founder together, I mean, you're going to get most of it, and you can always add stuff in as you go too. So, but one thing I do find is that different founders go at this exercise in different ways. Some people are really broad across the top, and some go really narrow down a given funnel. Like, I'm going to go into depth on pricing, or I'm going to go into depth on, registration features, or I'm going to go into depth on our sales process. And that's great. Like, I think it's good for every founder to bring to the table the thing that they care about and that they're working about right now. So what we do is, after you've taken the time to everyone do this for about, 10 minutes or so, 15, 20, if you're Megan, you have lots of ideas. You then actually come back together and you all look at the list, at all of the stickies together. And from there, what you do is you look at each sticky, you talk it through, and you decide, do you as a company, do you have data for that backs up that belief? And the thing that I ask companies to consider is, do they have data across two different vectors? One is, do they have some kind of dashboard internally that they can use to actually say, yeah, this sticky is generally true. I mean, it's not going to be true to the accurate decimal point, but like it's directionally true. So they have some kind of dashboard, Google Analytics, sales pipeline, customer CRM, customer service logs. You have it, right? Or do you have enough direct feedback from talking to customers that you can say this is true? And so, basically you've gotten enough customer input that says, yes, I believe this trend. The thing that I don't generally advocate for is, our competitors do it this way. That doesn't count. And, or hey, here's some third-party research that says this is true. And the reason for that is none of those competitors and none of that third-party research were building your business. And so the only way to validate if it's true for you is for you to have experienced it somehow, which gives you firsthand knowledge that indeed, this is true. And I don't know, Maggie, if you have some feedback on kind of how you've gone about trying to actually validate some of the beliefs that you've tackled at Skipper and Skiptown that you want to share about.
It's funny, at this point in the exercise, it becomes a little bit of a negotiation within the team of what we feel like is validated. And it is because, to your point, like you can have a dashboard, but then they're like, well, it's saying this thing, but these are the things we'd like to make the dashboard cleaner, or there's a lot of research on XYZ, and there could be. So this is where it's interesting, because I think this is the opportunity where you see people who are coming from different perspectives. They're in different roles. They're ambassadors for different things. This is where you can all come together. And to me, this is one of the best parts, is that it is that like coming together of the minds of people with different perspectives, championing a cause, being passionate about beliefs that they hold loosely once they get convinced otherwise. And I think this is a really important point, because I think this exercise is really important about having passionate beliefs that are loosely held, because you have to let things go. Things that people care very personally about and deeply about, because it is their core mission, it's their role, can be completely upended by this workshop. And watching and making a safe space for people to let those things go in the face of an alternative truth, like a different data set reality, is important. And it's like a good exercise, I think, for the people on your team to go through.
Yep, totally. So what we do here is, on this step, I'm going to pull up in my Miro board and screen share a little bit, is we basically, pull open, really simple. You go into the data that you had, and here it is, and basically ask everyone to go in and actually, as you debate whether you have data for something, we ask you to go validate it. So let's say we believe that our main buyers of our product are CMOs at Fortune 500 companies. So this is one we would have said, do we have data for this? Yes or no? Hey, let's look at our sales, our CRM, and see where we're actually getting inbound from. Oh, look, our inbound is coming from CMOs at Fortune 500 companies. I will mark this one validated. So you just go, and this is this Miro tool. You can just enter a little tag. I've already got this one tagged, but if you tag it validated, it'll just, identify it as such. And so you go through all of your stickies, say you have 50 of them here, and you do that one at a time. This is validated, this is not validated, et cetera. And now you have a sense of, here are the things that we collectively as a leadership team believe to be drivers of our business. And of that, here are the whatever, 30% of them that we actually have data around. Again, I'm just kind of right now, these individual stickies don't mean anything, but if these were true to your business, you would be, choosing which ones you choose to be validated. And the rubric I give to founders when doing this is, would you be willing to bet me $100 that if you said, hey, I want to, if I said, hey, prove to me, Maggie, that you guys have validated this, how would you show that to me? Would you have something you could use to actually validate that? You could show me the data that says, yes, indeed, this is true. And I say it's $100, and that's that sort of, strong conviction, loosely held. Like how much are you willing to bet, right? this is not I'm going to bet the whole company. Like, I got to make sure this is perfect before I do it. But it's also not so casual that you can kind of mark everything as validated and say, oh yeah, we talked to 2 customers once who said this, right? So it's like, would you bet $100 that someone would say, yeah, this is true? Which is that sort of, is it good enough from a data perspective to feel comfortable saying it's validated? And so that's really the next step. I find on this step, a lot of founders, interestingly, will ask questions. Well, they'll see notes that their co-founders wrote that they actually just flat out don't even agree with sometimes, which isn't a matter of, do we have data or not? It's a matter of, I don't think that's even what we're trying to do in the business, which when those conversations come up, I actually love it, because it's finding these little hidden pockets of potentially misalignment in the business and putting them on the surface. And it's a forcing function for the founding team to have to talk about those things. I don't know if you all came up with, had any of those, Maggie, happen when you've gone through this before, but if so, share, and if not, totally fine too.
We did. And what are your thoughts? I think of this workshop as success is to fail, right? And if the goal here is to find the things that are not validated. The goal is to find the misalignment. You don't want to you're not here to pat yourself on the back and like just inflate your ego. And I feel like that's an important thing, because it can become very quickly like it feels better when the column with the validated assumptions is bigger than the column of the unvalidated assumptions. But that's not the point, right? Would you agree with me? Like the point, like here is finding the unvalidated assumptions and finding the misalignment. And I think when you think of it like that, you can hopefully like put yourself and your team in a place to really let yourself be wrong.
Yeah, there are no right or wrong answers on, how many of these things are validated or not. And in fact, I find that different companies, as they progress through their life cycle, will go through waves of times when they have a lot of things that they know and are validated. And then maybe 9 months later, they're back to having a lot of things unvalidated. And it really is a matter of where the business is from a given product's perspective, in terms of, are they in product development mode around that product, or are they in operationalizing mode around that product? Because often when you're actually ready to operationalize something and like really roll it out, that's when you kind of know a lot about the underlying customer demands, the underlying mechanics of that product that you're building. And now you're ready to hit the gas pedal and scale it. And so that's, most of your assumptions at that point are known and you're just out cranking, versus when you're still in the creation phase, most of your stuff is unknown. And so a very mature company could be launching a new product and is in unknown stage on that product, which is totally fine. And they have a lot of unvalidated assumptions about that product. Whereas an early stage startup, maybe actually has pretty good product market fit with the first thing they're trying, and they're just in scale mode on that. And they haven't even started trying to think about, the next step in their journey yet. And so they're all validated, but now they need to figure out how to actually scale that product to market. So anyway, what we do next in the workshop is where I find the most sort of controversy comes up with founders, which is we go and look only at the validated priorities. So only the things that you have data around and they believe they're drivers in your business. You have data that says, yes, in fact, these drivers are true. We know these do drive our business and we know how. And then I ask the teams to, of those, pick a handful. And I describe that vaguely. Of your validated assumptions only, pick a handful that you believe are critical to your business and tag them as a priority. So just the ones that you validated, which ones are critical, go tag those a priority. And so the question that the way I ask people to think about that is this something that, if it continues to be right, it will take your business to the moon. It'll take your business to the next stage. It's truly, I want you to think in extremes. This thing is going to unlock massive growth. Or if you're wrong and it stops working, your business is going to crash and burn, right? So the only ones that you're allowed to mark critical are ones that is the answer to that question. It's going to drive your business in an extreme one way or the other. And this is where I think founding teams really can dive in and start to really question each other's assumptions. This is also the phase where I find a lot of people maybe have a pet project or two in the company that they've put on the list of like a thing they think is a really important initiative. And then when they put it on the list and see it relative to everything else the company is doing, sometimes those things kind of fade away from a criticality perspective. I don't know, Maggie, if you have, experience or kind of feedback on that step of assigning criticality that you think is worth sharing.
Yeah, a little bit. I think that a lot of times criticality can be very correlated to the role that you play. So if you lead the tech team, technology is going to be a bigger part of the company than maybe it is. Or if you lead the marketing team, how your customer experience, and it is something that is, I think, good to get out and talk about. And what we found, and one of the things that I think that was one of the bigger enlightenment points, was we were operating more and more like a retail company with the launch of our facility, and less of a tech company. We never sold our tech, but our tech was used to enable our services. And for a long time, we didn't really know. We considered ourselves a tech company, and it was because of this workshop that having the lead of our tech team really say like, yeah, we're not selling our tech, and that shouldn't be a priority. The priority should really be the retail side and getting people in the door. And it was this workshop that kind of got that out.
Oh, that's great. Super interesting. Yeah. So basically, you go through, you look at the ones that are marked as validated. You pick the ones that are critical and mark those as a priority. So then you have this whole bucket of sort of validated priority things. These are things you have data on that are true, that you also believe are critical to the business. And this is where I think we make this the last step in the workshop, but I think this is the magical step. Then you want to go look at all of the unvalidated assumptions, all of the things that you started out by saying these are drivers of the business, but you don't have data for them. You are totally like, we think this is how the business is going to work, but we don't know. Of those, which ones do you think are critical? And this is totally 100% subjective because you have no data. You as a leadership team are now having to decide, of all the stuff that you don't have data around that you think is important, which ones feel most important. They're going to either unlock the next wave of growth, or they're going to take your business, to crash and burn land. And that exercise to me is the magic part, because that's the house of cards stuff. That's the stuff that you're basing the entire business on, that if it's wrong, you're going to face some serious pain. Not to be totally dire about it, but it's right. Like if you spend 6 months building out an initiative around one of these high priority unvalidated items, only to find out that it was wrong, like the market doesn't actually think this way, or customers don't want this thing, you've just literally wasted 6 months of development time in your company. And so there's a critical step which is these unvalidated high priority assumptions are the ones that you need to be spending real time doing customer development around, customer interviews around, user research around, et cetera. And so you get to a point where you end up with this board that sort of, I'll share my screen again, sort of ends up looking like this, which is, you've got these, you've got basically a four board, or a 2 by 2, where you've got your high priority validated stuff here, your low priority validated stuff here, your high priority unvalidated stuff up here, and your low priority unvalidated stuff down here. And my recommendation is that this stuff that's high priority and validated is ready for you to actually take to market in some way, shape, or form, whether that's features you develop, whether that's sales plans you develop, whatever it is. And in this case, you obviously need to do a little bit of testing and validation on the individual feature, et cetera. But the general concept that, yes, this is something our company should lean into is, highly, is something you should be stepping on the gas pedal. This is the stuff I mentioned. This is the house of cards stuff, the high priority unvalidated stuff, which is, you believe it's really important to your business, but you don't know yet. And so I'd love to have Maggie unpack a little bit like how you deal with stuff in this bucket. And then my general recommendation is the low priority stuff for now as a startup, just as much as you can ignore it and like focus on the stuff up here, either in terms of building and shipping and deploying, or, you know, testing and learning and trying to make sure that when you do move this stuff over to this bucket because you have validated it, that, you know, you're actually set up to do so from success, and that you're actually going to spend time working on things that matter. So I don't know, Maggie, if you want to chat a little bit about how you've broken this down.
Yeah, I think that the most urgent would be the high priority unvalidated, like you mentioned, right? Like that's the black box of like, oh, like we've got some work to do. And we usually take the action items from that, or those are usually the high priority validated, already have product roadmap has already built that in. But if there's anything high priority unvalidated, we look at those first and we figure out what the next steps, homework items are. And I'm telling you, I've never met a company, and including my own, that talks to their clients enough. Or if you don't have clients, then your potential clients. And this has always been a catalyst for us to get off our butts and send some surveys out, because we want the answers. We're like motivated. We have the questions now, and we have the questions, we want the answers. And the next day we figure out how to go send surveys out to our clients and start to get those answers in as the first piece to starting to really validate some of those unvalidated things. But I'm telling you, there's nothing quite like everybody looking around the room and being like, oh man, like we don't have any data on this. How could we have let ourselves get this far without having data? What is the easiest way we can start to get data right now? And then we build out a plan to go get that data. And so we focus a lot on the high priority unvalidated.
Yeah. We have a couple of questions that have come in on that topic in particular. We've had a few more come in earlier. We'll make sure to address them as we go. But you know, one is, how do you do this analysis for a new company where you don't have a lot of data yet? And I think a related one is, how do you validate stuff that's somewhat philosophical in nature? Like the question is, you know, we believe people want meaningful work. Like how should you go about and validate that? Is it person on the street interviews? Is it, you know, surveys that you're sending? Is it, you know, user research and like actual like usability studies? Like, I'm curious some of the things you've done in the past to try to validate some of these unvalidated concepts, Maggie, and then I'm happy to share some stuff from my prior life in doing product development as well.
In our specific circumstance, we have a database of over 1,000 clients and over 10,000 people that we have emails for. So surveys are by far the easiest and best. And we've gotten, you know, we've honed the technique of how do you send short surveys out, you get people to fill them out. We have a good fill out rate. That's the number one thing that we do. If you don't have clients, or if that's not as big of a database, we are, you know, we have a really strong research skill set on our team. And so we go and try to find validated, well-sourced third-party data, which you might talk to, Cody, because I know you were you had a position on that. We look at studies pretty frequently, especially as it relates to like dogs in the family, et cetera. And we try to, you know, we get them sometimes they're really expensive. And so there's like creative ways to get that research that could otherwise be costly and get them, you know, accessibly through anybody that has like a college database, access to a college database, will have access to those studies. We also do a lot of targeting on paid ads. So we test stuff on paid ads. We'll have a link that doesn't go anywhere, and we'll see what the click response is when we put out different things, and we test a lot of things that way. Cody, what was your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it somewhat depends on the method of what you're trying to validate. So for example, I find paid ads are great for trying to validate messaging, right? So if you want to see, does this messaging framework resonate with people, or does this one resonate with framework, doing a small paid ad budget and, you know, targeting it against specific demographics on social in particular, or Google are really great ways to just see what messaging resonates. So that's a good one. When you're talking about sort of, and I think, you know, the question from Dawn was about philosophical questions, like how do you validate it if people feel a certain way? I find the best way to do that is customer interviews. And so that's more of a qualitative type of data to get. And what I like to do is when I'm trying to understand qualitative data, which is how does my customer think, right? Or how does my customer, like, what are they doing today and how do they feel about what they're doing today? Not like where are they technically blocked, but like how do they feel about how they're doing things today? that to me, I handle through interviews. And the way I normally do customer discovery interviews is I'll create a spreadsheet with about 10 or 15 questions along the top that I try to keep standard. And I try to not make them about my business at all. I try to make them more about how does the customer engage today? What is their day-to-day like? What are the methods they use? What do they like about them? What do they not like about them? What do they wish if they could have a magic wand? What would it be? It's like really like open, thought-provoking type of questions. And then I try to talk to, I would say at a minimum, about 15 or 20 people that are, relatively close to who I think my target customer is, trying to track them down, getting a hold of them on LinkedIn, getting a hold of them on Twitter, just asking for 20 minutes of their time to help me develop a product. People like to help startups. Like if you say, hey, I'm building a product in your space and it would really be meaningful to me if I could get 15 minutes of your time to ask you some questions, like half the time people are going to say, sure. If you do that, I find you ask these same questions, you then plot their answers according to each question, and then you can look, across the row or across the column. So for this one question, what did each of my 15 respondents say? And you start to see patterns. And for that, I find that if you, it's more art than science, but once you're no longer really learning from the questions you're asking, you're kind of starting to get the same patterns in response. That's to me when you've hit that good enough point on, do you have enough data? When you're getting scattershot feedback, you still either you're not asking the right question, or maybe there isn't a good common answer that can allow you to package that up, and that's also data for you to be aware of. So I really do believe in customer interviews, and one really quick way to do customer interviews also that works really well is if you're doing sales, like if you're out actually selling, tack on 2 extra questions every time you do a sales call that you just ask for information. So, hey, while we're building this out, there's 2 other things I really would love to know about your business if you'd be willing to share with me. How do you all tackle X, or how do you all tackle Y? And just getting them to open-ended answer that. But then if you start actually logging that, you're building this knowledge of repository for your company that I think is really helpful. Let's see. There was a question, Maggie, and you mentioned it too, around third-party data. So medical research, polls, et cetera. You mentioned you do use that for sort of validation. Maybe you want to talk through some of the, third-party data sources that you use, not specifically, but like how you use them. And then do you take them fully at face value, or do you try to go, do a level of sort of internal investigation against them as well?
Well, yeah. So we find really reputable sources first. So like IBIS is good. There's a couple other like industry reports that we follow that are like the top of the market, and we believe in their data sources. And I would be wary on any that you just kind of find randomly Googling and like find on the internet. You have to be careful about that. Because it can definitely lead you astray. I mean, we think about everything we put out there, if it's SEO related versus you putting in actual real data out into the world that's fact checked. You don't know, so you have to be careful with that. But depending on the industry you're in, like you mentioned, Cody, depending on what you are trying to validate, it can be a really valid, if not necessary, source for credibility. And you can find, I think, going into whatever your industry is, looking for the research groups that publish data on your industry, and then I would also look and see who they're funded by to make sure that there's no agendas behind it. But I mean, it's something that I think is an incredibly valuable resource. I would then say go find somebody who still has access to their college email or is in college now, especially at a grad program. They can usually get those reports for free. Otherwise, they'll cost thousands of dollars. So
yeah, that's great. And look, and I think also, I mentioned earlier on, like, don't rely on what your competitors do. I think listing what your competitors do as an unvalidated assumption is a good one, right? Because if you see your competitors are doing X, Y, or Z, and you're not sure why, and you assume they've studied it somehow, but you don't know, like that's a good one to write down as an unvalidated assumption, and then try to spend some time figuring out if this actually is the best practice or not. Maybe they are super rigorous and they figured out the best practice and it's awesome and you can just kind of lightly borrow. Or maybe they didn't do their homework and they're leaving money on the table and you find a better way, which is great to know as well. Let's see, we had another question come in about, earlier on in the workshop, what happens if, you're in the middle of step 3 and all of a sudden your team is debating something and a new idea comes out. You should absolutely sticky note it. Like when I do this at workshop, I would say a quarter of the stickies I have by the time I'm finished with it were ones that came out as a result of discussion. But just make sure when you do it, you then put it in the correct quadrant as well, right? So, hey, let's add this one, but this feels really unvalidated to me. Or, hey, oh yeah, of course we know this. We just, this was in our data report last month. Like we've seen this trend happen over and over again. Let's put it here and mark it validated, right? So just make sure you account for it accordingly, but totally fine to, add them. I also find oftentimes, depending on the author of a given sticky, sometimes you got to break the sticky up into 2 or 3 stickies because the thought is too big and you need to actually get more granular so that you can assign it appropriately. Let's see. We don't have any other questions that are coming in right now, but I think the thing that I mentioned, kind of you get to the end and you have this quadrant, I would mention a couple of things. One is, how often should you do this 4-box exercise? My recommendation, and I've seen quite a few companies I work with that do this roughly like once a quarter to twice a year kind of thing. So it's sort of any given moment when they're ready to pull back and do a strategic planning session with the leadership team. Like this is a good time to just reflect and make sure that the initiatives they're working on now have been amply thought through. I don't know, Maggie, if you want to sort of share how often you do something like this, or how often you wish you did something like this if you don't do it as often as you wanted.
We do it quarterly. We do it at our leadership retreat meetings. We do those quarterly, and so we do it with the leadership team, and then we also do it with each department because it is fun when you get specific, and the teams really like it when it's interdepartment because they can kind of go back and forth as it relates to. And you can. The best thing about this workshop, I think, is that once you get the components of it, which you now have, you can take that and kind of tweak it depending on what you want to use it for. So you can use it to validate certain product features that go on the roadmap. You can use it for specific teams that you want to kind of hash out, things that they're working on. We've used this in different ways other than just going over the whole company. And so I think it gets really fun when you start to take that and modify it and have it work for, different roles and different teams. And I would suggest trying that and seeing kind of what ways work. And you also create things that when we do in-person leadership retreats, which haven't been recently, we like to clear up a whole space on the floor, and we'll put sticky notes all over the floor. And it's something we do while we drink a beer, because it's a more fun thing to walk around and actually make it a fun exercise, and people, really get into it that way. So you find out what, the ways that you that works best for you.
Yeah. And I think, that's the thing with this workshop. Like when I was originally designing it, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago now, there are lots of, lean canvas, product market fit related workshops, but I found most of them are really complicated and, required moving things across multiple pipelines and this, that, and the other. And what I wanted to design was something that was just really simple, right? It's just a simple 4-quadrant, and you're moving your features accordingly to what you know or don't know about, what works in your business. And it is something that you can do just casually as a team, once a quarter over a couple hours. It takes, the first time you do this, probably give yourself 2 hours, but you can, if you get good at this, you can do it faster. You can do it in, I don't know, about an hour and a half at most, I would say. You could easily spend 5 hours doing it if you want to. So, it's really a matter of how deep you want to go on everything. The other thing I advocate teams, though, is in addition to this, which is like a quarterly-ish planning process, there's also stuff you can do on a daily basis and on a weekly basis to really help build this sort of learning culture into your company. I'm a big advocate for having a daily learning goal as an individual. So that is, every person in the company takes 15 minutes every day and finds something that they can learn about the business. So that could be, I'm going to spend the day going through my Google Analytics pipeline and really understanding it, or I'm going to spend the day going through my competitor's product with a fresh, clean install to make sure I understand how they're positioning the product. Or I'm going to spend the day, I'm going to ask 2 extra questions on every sales call I go through, just to learn something more and then share that back to the company during stand-up. And then on a weekly basis, that you actually prioritize learning backlogs. And so as a company, you allocate something like 15 or 20% of your engineering resources to actually building out hypothesis-focused product development as opposed to direct to market product development, which is a luxury. Like most startups, it's really hard to actually pull that off. But if you can aim to do it, it's great. I don't know, Maggie, if you have any insights there. I think we've got 1 minute to wrap up here.
No, that's a great idea. I'm going to take that and now do that with our daily stand-ups. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, cool. Well, thanks a lot. And I think Amos is going to jump back on here with us in just a minute. Maggie, it's always a blast to get to chat with you. And hopefully everyone got some value out of this. It's really simple. Again, a 4-quadrant: high priority validated, high priority unvalidated, low priority validated, low priority unvalidated. But start by just putting the stickies on one screen before you start sorting them, and talk through them together as a team, doing each of those exercises individually as opposed to trying to move them across the 4-quadrant at once, because it really forces you to think about things differently. I think that's it. Oh, Amos, you're muted. I can't hear you, my friend.
Oh my God, I said so many nice things about you too. Oh well, they're gone. No, thank you guys both so much for joining us today. That was awesome. I don't know if I've ever expressed this to him, although my guess is that I have. Cody came to the very first program I ran in Austin in 2016 and delivered that workshop, and I had never seen it before. I just heard about it, and I was just like, holy shit. It is my favorite workshop also, and one of the most valuable, I think, exercises that you can do in your company. And so just going back, as we think about it, Cody and I have talked about this a lot. We have a book coming out about it. We think about how do you add all these things together. So thank you for that. Hopefully everybody found a lot of value in that. And next we're going to move to a networking session for 15 minutes. And after that networking session, we're going to come back with Trevor Baim, who is the third part of actually a 5-part process that is the book. And Trevor will talk about, now that you know what you're working on, your high priority unvalidated assumptions, how do you measure them to know whether or not what you're doing is working or not? But before we do that, we're going to go over to a networking section, and I'm going to read this so that I don't get it wrong. Okay, so we're going to network and hop in. And to network with other attendees, press the networking icon on the left-hand side of your screen. You will be randomly paired with another attendee, and you'll have 5 minutes to chat with one another. If you'd like to continue your conversation after your session, just hit the connect button at the bottom of your screen, and you will both receive an email from Hopin that will help you contact one another. And for those of you joining us for Trevor's session on KPIs, we will see you at 2:45. See you then.